This is going to be a very brief overview of the diversification of early primates and an overview of primate evolution generally. So the end of the late Mesozoic is when we see the massive extinction event that leads to the extinction of a large number of reptiles, including the dinosaurs. As we've talked about in class before, at this point, things change quite a lot globally. A lot of groups of animals go extinct and a lot of new ecological niches open up. So what we end up seeing is we see different groups of animals that had been kind of kept in check as far as their population size goes, increasing in size and scope, diversifying, undergoing adaptive radiations, etc., etc. Now, mammals existed before this time period, but they were kind of kept in smaller numbers because there were so many reptiles that were occupying so many ecological niches. So once a lot of these reptiles went extinct, there's all of these new ecological niches for mammals to diversify and kind of move into. So one of the groups that appears during this time period are the primates. So the primates are kind of a subcategory within mammals that appear and begin to diversify as well. So the exact origins of the earliest primates are unknown, but we do know that after the mass extinction of these large reptiles, mammals are undergoing an adaptive radiation, and primates are one of these groups that emerges, as I said before. So we do know that globally, from a climate standpoint, this environment at the time was tropical in a lot of parts of the world. Where we see the earliest evidence of primate evolution occurring is in tropical environments. And this kind of syncs up with what we know of primate environments today. Primates tend to be tropically adapted animals, with the exception of humans. Now, the exact region and precise pressures, like selective pressures, that caused primates to emerge are not really known. But we do know that the first primates emerge in the fossil record around 56 million years ago. It's likely that primates were around before that. This is just the first fossil occurrence that we have. This is the first evidence in the fossil record. It's speculated that primates may have emerged as early as 65 million years ago, so that would be shortly after or around the time of the mass extinction event that I mentioned before. Okay, so the molecular evidence pushes that date back to possibly 80 to 90 million years ago. That type of evidence is best viewed with caution because molecular evidence tends to overestimate divergence times. So in this case, we should choose to kind of stick with the fossil evidence as opposed to the molecular evidence, because the fossil evidence is a little bit more precise and reliable. Okay, so this is an overview of what's going on with primate evolution during the Cenozoic. The Cenozoic is the time period that we are currently in today. So the Cenozoic is divided into 7 epochs that you see listed there. The first of which is the Paleocene, beginning at 65 million years ago, and then we kind of move forward from there. So the Paleocene, which is about 10 million years in length, we have the first primate-like mammals appear. We don't have the entire suite of primate characteristics present yet in these early fossils, but we do see primate-like characteristics. So we see a group of animals that are beginning to accumulate primate-like characteristics. These are called the plesiadapiforms. By 55 million years ago, we move into the Eocene epoch. We see the first true primates, so primates that have all of that entire suite of characteristics that we talked about earlier in the semester. The primates that we see in the fossil record during this time period of about 20 million years or so look a whole lot like modern prosimians. So lemurs, lorises, and tarsiers. We don't really see anything that looks like an ape or anything like that yet. So that lasts a little over 20 million years. We move into the Oligocene at that point. We see the early catarrhines, precursors to early monkeys and apes emerging in the fossil record. 10 million years, we enter the Miocene. 10 million years later, we enter the Miocene at about 23, and we have kind of fully modern-looking monkeys and apes emerging in the fossil record. So the Miocene lasts almost 20 million years. Towards the end of the Miocene is when we see the very first human-like creatures appear. So the Miocene ends at about 5.3 million years ago. And if you'll recall, 6 to 7 million years ago is when we see hominins first appearing in the fossil record. So we're talking about the tail end of the Miocene for the time period when earliest members of our direct lineage appear in the fossil record. Entering the Pliocene at 5.3, we see these early hominins beginning to diversify. We will go into a lot more detail about what's happening in the Pliocene and the Pleistocene during the last couple of weeks of class. But we do see species like Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, and some of her close relatives really appearing all over East Africa and parts of South Africa as well. The Pleistocene begins at 2.3 million years ago, and during that period we see early Homo developing and diversifying, and then we also eventually in the late Pleistocene see modern humans emerge at about 300,000 years ago, maybe 330, and finally the last epoch would be the Holocene, which we are currently in today, last 10,000, 12,000 years or so. The Holocene is really drastically different from a lot of the other, the earlier time periods, and basically the Pleistocene was a very difficult environment, rapidly changing climate shifts, very cold periods, glacial maxima, all of that kind of stuff. And when we transition into the Holocene, we see an evening out of global climate. Things become more temperate, things become more predictable. So this is what a map of the Earth looked like in this beginning of the early part of the Cenozoic era. The continents were in different places at this time period. In the previous chapter, you would have read a little bit about plate tectonics. Hopefully that's a familiar concept. So all of the continents were a little bit closer and in slightly different positions back then than they are today. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these early archaic primates, with primates in quotation marks, because as I said before, during this earliest period of the Cenozoic, we do not have full primate anatomy present. So these are archaic primates, these primate-like animals that are referred to as plesiadapiforms. So we see these fossils appearing in the fossil record between 52 and 65, so in the Paleocene epoch. These creatures, as it says here, are best known from fossil finds in the American West. So most of the fossil evidence comes from Wyoming. Some of it comes from like Montana, maybe a little bit from Utah. Generally, this region, this part of the country is where we find the very earliest fossil evidence for the emergence of primate-like animals. So this is a species or a genus called Carpolestes, which was found in Wyoming, dates to between 56 and 66 million years ago at a place called Clark's Fork Basin. You can see here what was actually found, the fossil material itself that was found. This is obviously doesn't look super impressive, but if you consider the fact that it could be as old as 66 million years, it's pretty complete. So you can see an artist's rendering here of what the complete skeleton would have looked like, and then what the animal would have looked like here. So as you can see, this is not anything that looks like a modern primate that you've probably ever seen. It doesn't really even resemble one of the prosimians. It looks more like a rodent than anything. So as I said before, we're not really seeing full evidence of all of the primate characteristics present yet. We're just kind of starting to see some of the characteristics, and they accumulate over the next 10 million years or so, and then in the Eocene we end up with the very earliest primates. So during the Eocene, we see the emergence of a category of primates called euprimates. These are the earliest primates that emerge in the fossil record. So we see some characteristics listed here, including forward-facing eyes. We talked a lot about that earlier in the semester when we talked about primate characteristics. Forward-facing eyes are really important for being able to live safely in the trees, having good depth perception, being predators, whether it's of small animals or insects or whatever. Greater encephalization, of course, is a reference to the size and the complexity of the brain. This is something that encephalization is a pattern that we see throughout the entire primate order. And of course, in humans, we have a very exaggerated form of encephalization. Number 3, the postorbital bar. The postorbital bar is an anatomical structure. It's basically a bar of bone that protects the eye socket. This is indicating an increased reliance on the sense of vision. So we have an anatomical structure that is emerging, that's evolving as a means of protecting the eye socket, protecting the eye. So as we are transitioning to a group of animals that is more reliant on the sense of vision, it makes sense to have this anatomical structure in place that can protect the eyeball. We see the appearance of nails instead of claws. We talked earlier in the semester about how nails are a characteristic shared by almost all primates. If you look at a monkey's hand, for example, it looks very, very similar to your own. And finally, we have opposable big toes and, of course, opposable thumbs as well. These features taken together seem to suggest an adaptation for warmer climates. So as I said before, this was a time period where we have kind of tropical environments where these animals are emerging. So evidence shows that these animals are evolving in a warmer climate with year-round rainfall. Okay, so the euprimates of the Eocene can be divided into 2 categories, the adapids and the omomyids. We see primate characteristics, of course, in both of these, but there are anatomical indications that are present that suggest that we're seeing early divisions between the lineage that would eventually evolve into the strepsirrhines and the haplorhines. So the strepsirrhines, if you'll remember back to the beginning of the class, are the primates that have wet noses, so the lemurs and lorises, and the haplorhines are those that have dry noses and lack the tapetum lucidum, lack that structure in the eye that allows them to see at night. So the haplorhines today include monkeys, apes, and tarsiers. So we're starting to see this early in time in the Eocene, we're starting to see a division between within this lineage where we're having the kind of separation or the divergence of the branch of what will become the strepsirrhines and what will become the haplorhines. Jumping forward a little ways, so we have some anthropoids, ancestral anthropoids appearing during the Eocene in China at 42 and at a site called the Fayum Depression in Egypt at 34. Moving into the Oligocene, we see more anthropoids in Fayum and other places as well.